Chapter 28. The Beginning of the End. Life in Izmir was a great deal easier than anywhere else I had ever been. Duties at the aerodrome were not onerous, and the summer passed pleasantly, with my mother seeming to grow stronger and better with each day. She spent most of her time in the garden, eternally planning new borders, new arrangements of flower beds, finding an outlet for her energy in the design of growing living things. Sometimes we found her embroidering, something she had not done for many years. She would sit out on the terrace, a scarf protecting her head from the heat of the sun, and a pile of shining embroidery skills on a small table beside her. Seeing her thus, the years fell away from all of us, and we were back again in the gracious house where my father had walked, and where the rafters had rung with the shouted laughter of my Uncle Ahmed. My sister arrived on a visit to us from Ankara, with a baby and an Arab nurse, and looking at the dark face of the nurse, the illusion of childhood was complete. It might have been Inja again, or Ferde. Muazzez appeared peeved when told that she and her unnecessary entourage crowded the little house. She flew from my sarcasm to the spoilings of my grandmother and complained that I was becoming embittered. She remained with us for a month, her husband joining us for the last week of the visit, and every day my mother appeared better, and we heard her joyous laughter for the first time for many months. Mehmet and I, noticing this, told each other that she was getting better, that she would never slip back into depression again. On the 10th of November 1938, Kemal Ataturk died, and great was the sense of bereavement when we heard the news. Turkey wept and wailed for her lost leader. The whole nation plunged into mourning. I got permission to go to Istanbul, travelling in civilian clothing. I realised my error afterwards, when I was caught in the press of frenzied people, whilst uniform officers strutted freely where they might. I joined the never-ending crowds entering the Dolmabahce Sarai, where Ataturk lay, in state, and the police tried vainly to keep order. Old women and young women wept for their hero, who would never come again. Bareheaded men shuffled silently into the vast hall of the sultans, where the father of Turkey slept his last long sleep. They had draped him with the Turkish flag, and 4 officers stood on guard about him, their swords held upwards in their clasped hands. The weeping, desolate people he had liberated filed past him, paying tribute, and I remembered many things about him. I remembered my first sight of him close to, and the 10th anniversary of his republic, almost 5 years ago. I remembered how the lean fanatic's face could light with a smile so dazzling that even his enemies forgave him much, and how, more frequently, the pressed-in lips smiled when the eyes remained dark and somber, challenging. The day they took him to Ankara, I managed with incredible difficulties, with much unchivalrous jostling, to get a place in one of the boats leaving Galata Bridge. We followed the battleship that was taking him to his capital, the city he had wrested and built out of Anatolia, but we only followed as far as the islands in the Sea of Marmara. There we waved farewell to him, for we could go no further. We watched over the rails as the bleak battleship rode the unquiet sea, and Ataturk, perhaps one day to become less than a memory, continued his voyage alone. We who had been privileged to know him even a little would look for a long time and in vain for the figure that would not come, the tall, stern leader with the hard eyes that could so suddenly soften, the welcoming hand on the shoulder, and the amused, harsh voice that said, "Well, Lieutenant, still running the Air Force." The lack of ceremony surrounding him upon formal occasions had not perhaps been in keeping with his impatient autocratic temperament, yet sometimes he had affected simplicity. We had never known when he would drop into the officers' club what he would next suggest. As I looked back to the battleship, I remembered the person he had been, and I felt the tears rise to my eyes as if a friend had gone. December 1938, and winter touching Izmir kindly with the lightest of fingers, and specialists once again were called to my mother. Injections gave her some temporary relief and quietness, but my grandmother's straight shoulders sagged permanently now under the great weight of my mother's illness. The early spring of 1939, my nerves reduced to tatters after the long months of tension at home. Then Mehmed bringing home a small, fair girl with babyish blue eyes, telling us he was engaged. Badia, her name was, and she looked frail as a doll, and one could not help wondering what sort of doctor's wife she would make. But they were so much in love, she 17, he 27, that one could not remain indifferent. My mother received the news calmly, but my grandmother, dear Martinette, loudly demanded to be told where the girl had come from and who were her parents. I think Mehmed must already have warned Badia, for she showed no surprise, no trace of indignation at the questions, only smiling her gentle, angelic smile, moving closer to the dark Mehmed, who gave the information my grandmother required. For a space, my mother came out of her dream world, and dinner parties were arranged, and she bought new clothes to attend other parties. Muazzez wrote peremptorily from Ankara, growing more and more like my grandmother in her younger years, and demanded that the happy couple visit her in order that she may have an excuse for giving parties too. And that incredible undying beauty came back to drape my mother, so that one was always caught by the exquisite surprise of it, and the years dropped away from her like magic, and she became a young girl again, to match Badia's innocent youth. One evening she asked me when I would marry too. Before I had time to make any answer, my grandmother said with a coarse laugh that half the mothers of Izmir wanted the same question answered. I could not but laugh at her sublime, conceited exaggeration, and my mother repeated the question. I kissed her hand and replied, "When I love." She answered, "That you will never do. You have no heart." I should know that. Then she started to cry, long tremors running through her body, and impatience swept cruelly upwards in me, so that I felt a tearful house and spent the evening in a bar, deserting the dinner party where I was to have been host. When I returned, my mother was in bed again, Mehmed pushing injections into her. Mehmed was ordered to Istanbul in May, and my mother's favourite doctor also left Izmir to take up residence in Ankara. She brooded alone, worrying more than ever about her health, about Mehmed and Muazzez in far-off Ankara, about Badia, feeling now that she would not make a suitable wife for my brother. She began to eat alone, sometimes not eating at all. Then she grew careful again, and would eat only if I were home. So I curtailed my visits to friends' houses or to the casinos, and ate at home each evening, trying not to chafe too much under this new restraint. She bound me with chains of love, even taking to waiting up for me at night, watching from the terrace to see me walking up the street. Even if I did not arrive home until 3 in the morning, still she waited in a corner of the terrace, never saying anything, never letting her presence be known, yet I could feel her mournful eyes watching me out of the darkness. I took to coming home earlier so that she could get some sleep. Her gaunt look grew more pronounced, and my grandmother complained that she kept her awake at night. They shared a room now, since my grandmother did not care for the Izmir servant we had engaged, and grew very grand and regal at the thought of having her in her bedroom. One night during dinner she looked really ill. Her hair was unkempt and uncombed, and one eye seemed to grow smaller and smaller as I watched her. I asked her why she sat at the table like this, and she looked startled for a moment, as though I had rudely interrupted some faraway private thought. Then she stammered that she was not well, that her head ached. Suddenly she lay her head down amongst the dishes, so wearily, so uncaringly, that my heart was wrung with pity. My grandmother rang for the maid, and she was put to bed, coaxed and petted out of her clothes like a child. Later, when my grandmother and I sat in the salon drinking Turkish coffee, I said I thought the time had come when my mother needed constant, experienced nursing, and put forward the suggestion that she would be better off in a private institution I had heard of. I remember my grandmother looked at me very oddly, and she said, "Your mother's not bad enough to separate her from her family and everything she has always known. That would be great cruelty, my son. She's only neurotic, and the doctors all say her headaches are migraine." I suppose they must be right, I said uneasily, unwilling to set myself up as an authority in the face of medical opinion on nervous disorders. "If one day she has to be sent away," continued my grandmother, following her own train of thought, "I pray God that I may not be here to see." She looked away from me, but I could see old bitter memories struggling in her face, and I knew that, though she and my mother had never liked each other, one always resenting the other, still they could not live apart for long. They had been together for too many years now, and had shared all the important things that had ever happened to them. We sat silent for a long time, and I rang for more coffee. My grandmother came out of her reverie. "If only there was something more I could do," I said, and my grandmother put out her hand and touched my knee lightly. "You've done everything that was left in your nature to do." The odd words startled me and revived the times I had of impatience, the harsh words I had uttered. My grandmother watched my struggle and said sadly, "It is too late now to torment yourself. You grew away from us a long time ago, shutting us out, and perhaps the fault was our own. I have seen how you have tried with your mother, how you have forced yourself to do as she wanted, but it was all false, my child. She knows that too. But you could not give more than you had to give, so there is no need to reproach yourself. You have done more for her than many sons who loved her might have done." "You make me feel ashamed," I said to her, hating my unnaturalness, remembering too the restraints that Mehmed had never had. "I can't come closer," I shouted in desperation. "I can't give her all my thoughts." My grandmother's wise old face looked understandingly at me. She nodded her head. "Husnu should not have died," she said, pressing my hand tightly. "She should not have been left alone so young in life." She shook her head sorrowfully, her eyes bright with tears, but none were falling, and I took her old, worn hand and kissed it. I felt her looking down at my bent head, and then she said, irrelevantly, "How like Ahmed you are."